Hi, this is Math Magic with Kydon, and in today's video, I am going to go through with you 3 things you need to know about drawing models in mathematics. Okay, so this is suitable for you if you're in primary school doing Singapore MOE math syllabus. So I'm going to go through with you how to draw models in mathematics and draw it fast and accurate. And the reason why you want to draw models, right, is also to help you solve difficult math problem sums. Because if you can draw models well, it basically reduces your problem sums into something like this. Okay, not sure whether you can remember your number bonds. And if you can do number bonds, you can solve difficult math problems. Okay? And the whole point of drawing better models is to get more marks in paper 2. All right, so paper 2 is actually known as the killer paper, okay, because you have a lot of weird questions, you have a lot of weird non-routine questions that makes you use a lot of funny techniques. So let's just go into it and see how we can draw better models. So let's look at the first thing. What are some characteristics of a well-drawn model? And the first thing that I want to talk about is actually the length of the model, because I realize not many schools actually teach this. So what I notice is some students will draw very, very long models and some students will draw very short models like that. Okay, so I always tell them that I recommend the length of the model to be the length of their little finger in real life. Okay, so this is like 1:1 ratio. So you put your little finger on the paper, and then after that, what you do, right, you draw. So what I'm doing now is I'm putting my little finger on the paper, and then I draw two what do you call this, vertical lines, and then after that I will use my horizontal line to draw across. I know on the computer it doesn't really look like the length of my little finger because there's a bit of skewing, but in real life you should be looking around the length of your little finger. So again, it doesn't have to be an exact measurement. So let's say this is your little finger and you say, hey, this is my model. So it's just a rough approximation for them. So I always tell them, is this correct? If this is your little finger, is this model correct? No, it's not correct. Is this model correct? No, it's not correct. Okay, so don't draw like 3 times the length of a little finger, or like half, or like 1 part. You know, your little finger is divided into 3 parts, right? Don't draw like 1 part of it. So that's way not the length of a little finger. Okay, so roughly this length. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is the position of your model. Where should you actually draw your model on the space provided? So my recommendation for my students is always to draw your models on the top left or on the top right. Okay. Now, wherever you draw, left or right, it's not really important. But the main thing is, do not draw your models in the middle of the page. Oh my God, you know, there are so many times I see students drawing their models smack in the middle of the page, and it disrupts their flow, their working, everything. All right, so I'm going to show you an example of what I mean. So let's say, for example, I have a problem sum over here. All right, so the first thing that I teach my children, especially those who are very untidy, right, is to draw a line in the middle of the page. Okay, use a ruler and draw a line like this, right? Do not draw using freehands. And then your models can be here. So you can draw your models here, or you can draw your models here. All right, then it doesn't really make much of a difference, because if you draw it on the left side, you can do your working over here, and then if you finish your working, right, then you can continue with your working over here. So you can draw it on either side of the model. That's fine. Now, the main thing that I want to show you, right, what happens when you draw your models in the middle of the page. So usually what they do, right, they first draw the models in the middle of the page, and then after that they'll start doing their working over here. And once they have realized they have no space, they will try and, you see, what happens is that you have very little space left on this part of the paper. Okay, and sometimes you have this line which says do not write in this space. So basically you have your space is very limited. And for P6 questions, right, your working can get quite long. So you want them to basically manage their space well. So therefore, I always tell them, if you are yeah, always start on the top left or on the top right, it's fine, okay? And then draw a line in the middle of the page. So just to make sure that you can maximize your area for your working over here, and over here you can do some more working and do some more working. And if you need to cancel, if you do wrong, so on and so forth, then you can have more space to do it. And there's a certain flow to your working as well. It's not like jumping all over the place. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is you need to separate your models. Okay, so I know some schools, they teach students to draw like that, right, which is to combine the models together. They might teach you this in lower primary, maybe P3 to P4, but I guarantee you once you go to P5, P6, you're going to regret doing this. And the simple reason for this, why you do not want to do your models like that, is because you cannot label. So for P3, P4, let's say I call this A, I call this B, and then you try and label here, right? You try and label here. Many times in P5, P6, you start to cut in the middle of the models, and then you realize that, oh my goodness, I've got no space to label over here. So usually what I tell them is you draw your models, and then after that, leave a space, draw another model, and then when you cut it, it's very clear where you're cutting the model, and then when you cut another time, you can label this part, you can label this part, you can label this part, and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's just easier for you to label your models. Next thing I want to talk about, right, is label the top and the bottom of models, not the inside. This is what I mean. So let's say I have a long model here, and I have a shorter model here, and I cut, and I say that A and B, A has maybe 36 more than B. Okay, and after that, A gave 12 away. So sometimes what they do, right, is they cut here, and then they write here 12. Now it's very clear, right? But many times, oftentimes, I've seen students make careless mistakes from this, and then they assume that this part is actually 6, and this part is actually 3. All right. So when you are labeling, right, do not label the inside of the models. Label the bottom of the models like this. So you cut your 12 here, and then when you have 36, what you want to do, right, is to label like this 36, and then I say I gave 12 away, and then how many am I left with? Okay, so it makes it so much clearer when you are cutting. So sometimes you have, let's say, okay, this is 1 unit here, and then I cut it, and then I say this is like maybe 12 or something like that. And then you forget that this entire part, right, this entire part is 1 unit. And after that, you realize, you would think that, hey, it's just this part that is 1 unit, because your 1 unit is over here. All right, so it's very easy to make careless mistakes when you label the inside of a model. And that's why I always recommend the split, so that I have space to do 1 unit and then 12, and then this is the question mark, and I know what is this question mark. It's very clear that it is 1 unit minus 12, you get the question mark. Okay, otherwise it's very easy to make careless mistakes. So do not label inside, label the top and the bottom of models. The next thing I want to talk about, right, is whether to use ruler or freehand drawing. In general, I am fine with both. I just find that sometimes ruler, yeah, I'm fine with both. I mean, there are pros and cons to each. But if, let's say, you use ruler, right, this is what I want to teach you. Again, this is your little finger. So if you use a ruler, usually I ask them to put their little finger on the paper, draw 2 of these vertical lines first, and then after that, take a ruler and draw your horizontal lines. All right, so I didn't do it super well here, like that. Okay, so these 2 lines are drawn by hand, and these 2 lines are drawn by ruler. Okay, why do it this way? Because it's really troublesome to keep turning your ruler around from vertical to horizontal. Okay, and anyway, it's just easier because I know my finger is there, right? So I just draw 2 lines down my little finger, like that, 2 lines down, and then after that, I just use my ruler, and then I connect the top and the bottom lines. So that's much easier. Now, if you're using freehand to draw, which I'm fine with, now the thing that I'm not fine with, right, is later I'll show you some bad examples of models, but basically you have like things like, like that, or you have things like, this kind of models, all right, or like basically round models. You get a lot of weird shapes. So when you use freehand, right, this is a trick that I learned. I used to be a bit interested in drawing last time. So the thing is, use your entire arm to draw, which means like this. There's a reason, right? If you look at teachers, how come teachers, right, when they draw on the whiteboard, their models are very straight, which is something that I never really understood when I was a student. Like, how come when my teacher draw on the board, right, the models can be like perfectly straight and they are using freehand to draw? Why? Right? But how come my models look so horrible when I'm drawing the paper? The reason is because teachers use their entire arm to draw. When I say entire arm, right, I'm talking about this part to this part. Just make sure you can see it in the camera. This part to this part, okay? When you draw, you want to move your entire arm, right? You start moving the entire arm over here. And that's the same thing when you're drawing on paper. So they can draw the thing, but if you look at this, right, if you look at my lines, I'm actually drawing freehand, but it's quite reasonable, right? I really think this line is quite reasonable. And the reason is because I draw with my entire arm, okay? If you draw, okay, the other option is you draw using your wrist, like that. So you draw using your wrist. So if you draw using your wrist, right, this is what happens. I'm drawing using my wrist right now. You see the difference, all right, of the two models, using the entire arm, and using your wrist. Actually, it's the same concept for handwriting as well. If you write using your wrist, right, then you will write not so nice, which is what I'm doing actually. If you write using an entire arm, it looks nicer. So so how do you do that? Is you want to start practicing drawing straight lines on the paper. Okay, just draw straight lines and make sure that your child, right, uses their entire arm to draw. All right, so like that. Draw. So just practice drawing straight lines. And once you get this, you draw your two horizontal lines. You just have to connect this. And then just have to connect this, okay? Just pull the pen, use the entire arm and pull the pen across the page. Pull the pen across the page. And they can do it one, right? Just practice maybe 5-10 minutes and just pull the pen across the page. Pull the pen across the page. And it's really straight, all right? And then you do the other side. You cut the other side and then it's really straight as well, all right? So we just connect this a bit. I just find that freehand, I personally prefer using freehand because it's faster. And easier for me. I don't like using rulers. Anyway, if I draw on a whiteboard, I also cannot use rulers, so I practice using freehand. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about, right, is the difference between models is around 1/3 of the length. Place your place your little finger on the table. And then after that, first thing, right, you draw your vertical line. And then you draw your horizontal line to connect the models. And the second thing, right, the second vertical line, this one is actually quite important. This line and this line, try to make sure that they are aligned together. Now the second vertical line should be around difference is around 1/3. So around 2/3 of this. So somewhere here, around here. So when you draw the vertical line first, the advantage is you can set the difference first. Okay, and then after that you draw the horizontal lines to connect. Now, this is what happens if you draw the horizontal lines first. You draw the horizontal line, and say, oh no, it's too long. What am I going to do? And then you need to draw the vertical line somewhere here. And then after that, you need to like take an eraser and rub away this extra part. Like that, rub. And then you got some left over here. And you know this is a computer, so it's perfect rubbing. But in real life, if they're using, and they got their rubber and and then after that, the whole thing just gets like destroyed. Okay, so it is important for you. That's why I always recommend them, right, to draw the vertical line first. So once I set the vertical line, right, it sort of gives me my start point and my end point. Then after that, I will just draw here and then I draw here, and booms. Like, don't you think this model is much nicer? Well, I think it's much nicer. Okay. So I'm going to talk about some bonus tips for P5 and P6, basically upper primary, P5, P6, where you get more complicated. It's very important to practice cutting your models, all right? Cutting, reflecting, and sequence. So this is something I drill my P5 and P6 to no end. So what I've talked about, right, is this. So first of all, I draw my middle finger, draw my tool. Actually, this is also considered a sequence lah. Once you draw the 2 vertical lines, then draw your horizontal lines, then draw my 2 vertical lines. You see how easy I draw my models, all right? It's really very fast. How fast did I take? And then label it A, B. So my steps, right, is always step 1 is long model, step 2 is short model, step 3 is to label. And there's a reason why I do it in this way, which I'll show you some examples in a future video. Right, so this is step 1, step 2, and this is step 3. Now, what is cutting? Cutting basically means this. So I have a cut, and then I draw this, and this is maybe about 12, doesn't matter. And then after that, B sold, let's say B sold another 7 or 8. So if B sold another 7, so this must be 7. Now, when you cut at the bottom, or at the top for that matter, straight away, make it a habit to immediately reflect it to the top. Okay, so when I have 7 here, what is on top? This is 7. All right, so straight away reflect it to the top. And then I say, oh, A sold another 5 or whatever after B sold. So I have 5 over here. I have 5 over here. Straight away reflect it to the bottom. So this is also 5. All right, and then once you do this, once you get used to doing this, right, your problem sums basically becomes number bonds. All right, it's incredible how it just simply becomes number bonds. You remember the Mickey Mouse thing that your kid used to do last time? All right, this Mickey Mouse thing. So let's say this is 12, so this is 5, and then this is 7. Problem sums just become number bonds. And this is the reason why I'm so angry, sad, frustrated when I see them, you know, modeling their models. So because the first thing is, it's not that difficult to do. A properly drawn model is not that difficult. It's faster and it's easier, and it simplifies the problem so much. Sometimes when I do it on the board, and then their jaws drop, and they're like, oh my god, it's so easy. It literally becomes a number bond. And that's the answer. All right, so I'll show you some examples in future videos. So the first thing is for P6, P5, P6, practice cutting. Okay, they have to do this cutting correctly. So when you cut, right, this is the only tricky part. When they cut the model, this is the part where I encourage them to use a ruler to make sure that they cut correctly. This part is cut correctly. Because if they cut it wrong, right, like that, right, then you cannot do it really. So I've seen P6ers who do like that. Okay, they cut here and then once you do this, right, then the whole thing sort of breaks down already. So you have to do this part correctly, the cutting part correctly, straight, accurately. Then they are able to use the number bonds method, okay, or to convert models into number bonds. All right, so I'm going to do a recap of what we have talked about in this video. All right, so in this video we talked about the first thing is, so some characteristics of well-drawn models. So first thing is the length of the model. What length should it be? So do you remember what's the length? So it's around the length of your little finger. Okay, so remember, use your little finger, put it on the paper, and then just draw the vertical lines over there. The second thing you talk about is the position of models. Where should you actually draw your models? And you should draw your models, remember, on the top right or the top left. Okay, wherever you draw it, top right or top left, doesn't matter. Just don't draw it. Do not draw in the middle of the page. Okay, so this is wrong. Don't draw in the middle, because that will disrupt your flow. You have no space to do your workings. The third thing is to separate your models. Okay, so when you want to draw models, you want to draw them separated like that. All right, so you label A and B so that you have space to label the top, you have space to label the bottom, you have space to label the entire thing, to label here, label here. So basically you have more space lah. The next one is to use ruler or freehand drawing. So either is fine, but again, if you draw using this is your little finger, draw your vertical lines first, and then after that draw your horizontal lines. Both ruler or freehand, both is fine, depending on what the school insists lah. But if the school doesn't make any doesn't insist them to do it anyway, then I would recommend using freehand drawing. All right, difference in model length. Remember, your difference in your model length should be around 1/3. So if you draw your little finger is this length, you draw it like that. So the difference is around 1/3. So like this. Okay. So the second model should be about 2/3 the length of the first model. My point is, do not draw like that lah. Don't draw models that are like that. Okay, like that. You must make some kind of meaningful difference. And the next one is, why draw vertical lines first? Right? Remember, why draw vertical lines? So that you do not exceed your horizontal line. So I know some schools teach them to draw a vertical line like this down, and after that they draw the models like that, right? So draw the models here, which is fine. This is also okay. And then the second one, right, like, and then sometimes they draw like this. Then they have to cut. Then they have to rub away. So you don't want to do that. So what you want to do is you set your vertical line first, and then you have a start point and an end point, and you know where your goal is, and then booms. Can you see the difference between the models? It's so, to me, it's so significant, you know. It saves time, it saves rubbing, it's more neat. It's so significant, the difference. When you realize how useful models are, then you will realize why I'm so insistent on drawing it correctly. And for P5, P6, we talked about cutting and reflecting models, all right? So make sure that you cut your models correctly. So when you draw your models, and then you draw the other one, and then when you cut, right, make sure you use a ruler, cut it over here, and then draw the dotted line down. And then label the top, label the bottom. Oh yeah, I also have one more, right? The labeling. So do not label inside, right? Do not label this is 36, this is 42. Do not label inside. Always label the top and the bottom, okay? Because when you cut it, then you sort of forget that, oh, 42, is it the whole thing? Is it half of the thing? Is it... I have made this careless mistake myself numerous times. And that's why I sort of gave up writing my numbers inside. All right, because I've made the careless mistake so often that let's say this is like 64, right? Then I cut, right? Oh my God, this is 6 or 4. Or the worst one, right, is you cut and then this is 64, and then you forget that 64 is actually this whole part. Okay, so once you do that, you make careless mistakes, then the purpose of drawing models breaks down.